Hello, everyone. This is Thomas Pepin NHL Talk. I'm Thomas Pepin, and let's talk about the NHL. So, as you can see, I had planned to start the stream at 9 a.m. Eastern, but because I never do it in the mornings, I didn't adequately, I guess, prepare to be able to do it on time. So, my apologies. About an hour late, but in any case, this is a one off, so I won't learn anything from my mistake. So, my apologies. But anyway, so the subject of today's stream is considering carrying three goalies. So, this is something that I alluded to, I think, on a couple occasions in previous streams. It's, I think, a very unique idea, and it's not so much that it's all that creative, but it is in effect because nobody does it, or at least so nobody does it, and it feels like nobody's really considered it, or at least has they've not strongly considered it. So um, I'm gonna kind of have a look at things, and so um, give me one sec here. Yeah, so essentially it's the cost benefit of having three goalies on your active roster versus the standard two. Um, yeah, and essentially that's about it. So we're going to be looking at a whole bunch of different things. As always, this is on the spot, unprepared except for the subject. So I don't know of all the different ways we're going to look at it, but I had a few already in mind previously, so we'll kind of go through, and I'm sure they'll all be discovered as I work on it here. Um, so we might as well get to it. So just give me one sec to um, move a couple things and get set. So just bear with me here. That goes down. Actually, I should have this. Okay. Um. Oh, actually, no. I should pull up a few documents here. So just give me a couple more seconds, because there's a few for sure I'm gonna need to use. Uh, which ones are they here? Probably this. Probably this. I'll just pull up all the ones that are relevant, and then we'll kind of go through. I also want that. No, 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 no. Actually, I think I'll need that too. Have that, have that. Okay, so this should be everything I need. Okay, so the first thing I want to start off with is what we finished off with on Saturday. So, what stupid thing? Sorry, one sec. we go. So what I finished off with on Saturday was we were having a look to see if there's any correlation between the percentage representation of goals by forwards and point percentage. So to kind of summarize and clarify as to why it's relevant, so what we more or less discovered is that what appears to be most important is the differential. Well, I mean, obviously the differential, but as a result of that, it's less about your defensive scoring and more about sufficient gap between offensive total offensive production and total defense, so minimizing goals against. So then, in effect, what I argued was my prediction and my assessment of things where forwards have more value than defensemen appears to be correct. And it's not so much that defense aren't important, but defensive production is not important. So that's more or less the conclusion that I drew. In application, I don't know. And because I'm not into advanced analytics and stuff, I could easily be proven wrong, or at least in part proven wrong with some data, but I still feel intuitively it makes sense where if you just stack your roster with defensive defensemen, allocate all your money that you can to offensive production, in theory, your goal differential should be optimized, I would argue. And you're also well, the reason is because you'll be able to better allocate your money to forwards, which means your production is going to go up in total. And because defensive defensemen tend not to cost as much, you can spend less there, spend more on forwards, and get actually better production, I think, is my hypothesis in the end, at least. So whether or not it's true, I mean, I don't know. It would require substantial analysis to get to those kind of conclusions. And like I said, I think I might be able to look into the advanced analytics and justify my claims, but it's probably outside of this scope, and I don't know if it's absolutely necessary anyways, but we'll play it by ear as we go through the whole series anyways, because there's still a number of steps. So anyways, so those are the kind of conclusions from the last stream, and as a result of that, if you're spending less on defense, more on forwards, you in theory could spend more on goalies. It's not necessarily even relevant at that point, but as a concept, or it might not become relevant, I should say, but as a concept, it's still something to consider as you're planning with your the structure of your roster. So anyways, so that's one point I just want to keep in mind as I work on things. Another thing is so unrelated to the last stream, from other work I've done, which I can't really share because it's my own algorithm I use for sports betting, and it's done well for me. and so I can't really disclose that. But from what I've discovered, um, I would argue, and this is through analysis, like, you know, at least, as good of analysis as I can do with statistics. What I've discovered is that the value of goal prevention is quite high. And I mean, so that's, I can at least partially demonstrate it from the data from the last stream, which where the correlation between goals for and point percentage, as well as goals against and point percentage, are essentially the same. And so this, although it's rudimentary in comparison to what I did, it demonstrates that goals for, goals against kind of have an equal importance. Um, and so, since I think, or I would argue, and especially so with the other analysis I've done, uh, the greatest factor, or the largest proportion of impact on goals against, is goaltending. Now, I mean, that's kind of obvious, maybe, but when you think about it, team defense really makes a difference. A goalie just, they can't exclusively stand on their head, but I would argue that they can almost carry a team to a certain point. So, like, for example, if you were to quantify the effect on uh, the quality of a team's defense uh, with regards to goaltending, so let's say goaltending is X percentage of total defensive capabilities. I mean, I would argue it's at least 50% probably of your defensive quality. It could be more, maybe could be less, but it doesn't seem like it would be less. So, uh, anyway, so the results, like I said, from the last stream at least indicate that if goalies are a large proportion of the defensive quality, it shows that then they should be valued dramatically higher than they otherwise would be. And as a result, uh, draws this question up, which is, should they maybe carry three goalies? Um, so the other thing that I should discuss is, before we start looking at some of this, is um, something that I've read. I don't have the reference right now, and I can't think of finding it quickly, but um, from what I've seen and myself, as well as from what I've read, goaltending performance fluctuates a great degree, year from year, or year to year, as well as from different um, over a number of years. So there's like a very select few that maintain consistent performance, or have maintained consistent performance over any sort of stretch. And if they do, it's a very limited stretch. So, like, Saros is one goalie that's done a fantastic job. I believe Vasilevsky's another one. I'd have to go through stats to confirm all of this, but I think there's like six goalies. And I can pull up actually a study I did previously uh, that might tell me exactly. But anyways, the fact that goaltending performance fluctuates, well, if that's the case, uh, and goalies are so important, then why wouldn't you carry three goalies, so that as one goalie's performance decreases, you've got a backup, and if both the starter and backup, or at least from titles, starter and backup, aren't performing well, theoretically the third stringer might be able to do it. And so if you have three options as opposed to two options uh, to increase your performance and a very important part of your performance, why would you not do that? It just seems like a really obvious thing that teams, again, at least should be considering. There's more to it than meets the eye, obviously, but that's the thoughts here. So, um, and the last thing, which is part of what we're going to have a look at, is contrasting the value of a roster spot between a goalie and a different uh, depth player. So, for example, is a third string goalie more impactful, more uh, useful to have than typically what it would be is two forwards and a defenseman as your three extra roster spots of your 23 man roster? Uh, is that goalie more impactful than those three? The usage of those three roster spots typically. So we're going to have a look at player stats at that level, which we've already gathered, which is why all these streams are interrelated from this series. Um, We'll go back and take a look at those stats and consider, and hopefully, I'd like to quantify it, but I might not be able to. Uh, but at least superficially quantify the value of those, how those roster spots are usually used with forwards or defensemen. Uh, so contrast that with changing it to using one of those for a third string goalie that remains with the NHL team. So, anyways, so that's kind of the big picture explanation of what I want to look at and the justification for it. I hope it all makes sense. I think it does. And we might discover other things along the way here. So let's get to it then. So this we won't really need to look at again. But like I said, the main point was goals for and against appear to be nearly equally important. The largest driver of goals against is probably a goalie, which means that then goalies probably have a greater value than maybe people give them credit for. So that's the point from that. Now we'll have a look at which one of these. So we've got player expectations. That's the stats. Goalie expectations. We'll start with goalies actually. So where are we at here? Okay. So we'll just talk about things kind of broadly speaking. So previously, I established three tiers of goaltending. And so we've got the top, what was it? 48 goalies over a 3-year time frame, which would indicate goalies good enough to make the playoffs over those years. And so the reason is 16 teams make the playoffs. Multiply that by the 3 seasons, you get 48. And then so that's kind of like a starter tier, you could call. Everybody else more or less fills in the backup tier, and then you've got the third stringers and like the extras, you could call it, for the rest. So what would be optimal is to have a excuse me, or what I would say might be optimal, just at, if this idea is correct of carrying three goalies, if that's correct, then what would probably be optimal would be to have a starter and then two goalies of, like a backup tier that are both serviceable. So then if your starter gets injured, you've got two goalies. You've got the same quality of goaltending as any other team. So usually, oftentimes, what it is you have a starter, and then a mediocre backup, or you've got a 1A, 1B, where both are very similar in performance. Those are usually what appear to be the structures of roster spots for goaltenders right now. So if instead you had a starter and 1A, 1B almost, or a starter and two 1Bs, then what would happen is if you lose your starter, you've got two 1Bs, which are probably enough to get you in the playoffs by themselves. But paired with the starter, it leaves you an outstanding structure or depth for goaltending. So, anyways, so that's what I'm kind of thinking in the concept of. So the plan is to get a starter and two 1Bs, or 1A, 1B optimally, but that might be too expensive. So we'll just kind of see based on cost and all that. So these are kind of the tiers. So optimally, we'll get the starter. So in this top tier, which would be save percentage of 918, goals against average of 249 approximately. This is just ballparking it. And then, if possible, another person from that tier, and then the next tier, or two from the next tier if that's more realistic, where they have a 904 save percentage, goals against average of 3. So that's kind of the target we're going to be aiming at. We'll see if it makes sense structurally, and as well in contrast to the alternative, which would be using that roster spot for a defenseman or a forward. So keeping that in mind, we'll have a look then at the production now of forwards and defensemen at the tiers that you'd be replacing. So let's make this larger. So we've got here the tiers that I established. If you're looking for an explanation, you'd have to go back to the stream that's relevant. I can't offhand remember the name of the stream, but I think it's establishing player expectations or something like that. But anyways, so now you're getting into more or less these last spots here. So specifically from these tiers, it should be 13th, 14th, or 15th roster spot. Yeah, it just depends. So because we haven't actually built a roster yet, we don't know what's realistic for those last roster spots. Because you might be able to get, 12th tier performance for up to 3 of those extra roster spots. So the 3 of the 23. So, but anyways, just for argument's sake, we'll start here as if this is the limitations. You can only get up to the 12th spot and you fill all those 12 spots. So let's just say that's the case. So starting with forwards, what we're going to want to do is contrast this performance here of this tier and probably the top one of that tier with a third string goalie that remains on the active roster. So is a third string goalie that's serviceable better than or more useful than 4 goals, 5 assists, and 9 points for a season? I would say almost certainly and almost very obviously yes. That's what I would argue right off the hop. So, I mean, like, if you can get a third string goalie that comes in and plays, let's say, just for argument's sake, something like 10 games, to have 10 games of quality starts versus a player that's going to play, I don't know, maybe 30 some odd games in a season and contribute 4 goals, 5 assists, and 9 points, like, I'd say it's obviously more valuable to have that goalie. So I'm going to see maybe as we go through if there's a way to quantify that. Maybe have a look at some of those advanced analytics sites and see if they have anything that explains or can help us answer that question. But just looking alone at the numbers and having any background as a fan of hockey, right away intuitively you could argue the third string goalie must be valuable. There is the chance that they don't get used in the end. Like, let's say there's no injuries or no problems with performance, but I would say that's extremely unlikely that one of the two doesn't happen in the span of a season. So, anyways, to have that as a backup, well, third string backup in reality, I mean, it really, right away, it already looks to be more valuable. Now, this could prove to be even more correct in the case of defensemen. So just a sec to pull that up. So for the extra roster spots for defensemen, it would be anything after 6 roster spots. So you have 7, 8, and 9. And the contribution from those positions are 1 goal, 6 assists, and 7 points. And that's the best case scenario, more or less, for one of the 3 remaining active roster spots. So I guess one way we can quantify this, let's see. Actually, this is really probably one way to justify the claim that I'm making here. So let's pull up bear with me a sec. So we want 2013-14 up to 2018-19. We want goals for think I can share again here. So let's do this here. So what value does the 13th forward have as a percentage of total goals? So that's a way that we can kind of quantify it. So let's say that they score, like I said here for the tier, 4 goals of the total scoring for that team. So the lowest goals for from 2013-14 up to 2018-19 was 150 goals for. So that's the least amount. So by taking this scoring as a percentage of that, makes it the largest possible value that the player could have in theory on a team. So we take the 4 goals for the 13th spot, 4 goals divided by the 150 total goals scored. So it's 2.7% of total goals scored. So 2.7%. We'll remember that. Now, I might need another. Yeah, I will need another document that I didn't have pulled up here. So a previous stream again that I did was trying to quantify the number of players needed for any given team. So what we found was the give me one sec. So the minimum number of goalies minimum number of goalies needed per year on average was 2.81. The where is it here? Oh, I might have made a mistake on the calculation there. Whoops, I think I made a mistake across the board here. That's okay. It's not that critical anyways. Max. Because it doesn't impact the actual results anyways. So, so the minimum average goalies, or wait, no, it's it's just the minimum. No, it is the minimum average goalies. So minimum average goalies is 2.81 per season. The maximum was 3.72. The average was 3.14. So in effect, across the board, really you need you're going to use 3 goalies. It's almost certain. So the question is then, how many games are they probably going to play? So we have a look then. Actually, I don't need that anymore. Give me one sec. Okay. And the next thing I was going to show is going back to the goalie expectations. So if you need to use three goalies, on average, you're probably going to turn out needing. I mean, okay, so sorry, this isn't a perfect way to quantify it, but uh, because I had filters in all of this anyways, so the minimum game requirement was 20 games. So what's I don't think I have any other data points to show. So then I guess I'll just have to say whatever comes to mind, what makes sense. So, I mean, in theory, uh, we already established that on average teams need to use three goals. The exact amount, I don't have that data. But you could guesstimate it's probably something like 10, maybe 10 games, maybe more. It's hard really to say. Give me one second. I'm just going to see if there is anything that I do have. Do, do, do. No. I'm going to go back to that other analysis I did previously. Just bear with me a moment. Does it have... No. Yeah, I can't... None of the data really tells. So, I mean, really, it's going to have to just be intuition. I mean, I can pull up... you know what? We might as well do that. I'll pull up stats for goalies for those seasons, and then we'll just kind of see. Where is it here? Alright, so 2013, 14 to 18, 19. Get stats. So we want season. So this will make it just so it's not complete judgment, intuition. We can kind of it'll be superficial, but we'll at least be able to quantify to some degree, um, superficially, how many goalies get used and how many games they would play. Um, so I can share this again now. So we'll just scroll through here. So I got all the goalie stats from 2013-14 to 2018-19. And basically just what we're going to have a look at is, again, superficially, how many games a third stringer will have to play. So Anaheim has 3, Boston 1, Buffalo 9, Carolina 21. That's a great example there. Columbus 4, Calgary 9, Chicago 5, Colorado 1, Dallas 2, Detroit 9, Edmonton 10, Florida 16, Los Angeles 19. It's not a perfect, we're not doing this perfectly because remember there's some of these goalies have played for 2 teams in the season. It's just kind of giving us a general idea. So 23 for Minnesota. 3 for Montreal, 3 for, sorry, wrong team. 25 for Nashville, another good example. So we haven't even gone through half the teams for one season, and on, what was it, 3 occasions already, something like that, they've needed to rely on a goalie for 20 some odd games. That seems extremely extremely important. Like that alone, just from, so half the teams in one season, 3 teams needed to rely on 3 goalies, with one of those goalies playing somewhere around 20 games. Just think of that. So is a forward that scores 5 goals in a season more valuable than a goalie that plays 20 some odd games? There's no comparison. Like, I think this alone already justifies my claim, and proves my point. So we'll still scan through and see if that's just because, I mean, the small sample size so far, but I think already this proves my point. So anyway, so we'll continue through here. So Islanders 19. So I mean, it just doesn't seem to end here. 2 for New York, 2 for Ottawa, 1 for Philly, 1 for Phoenix, none for St. Louis, 2 for Tampa, 2 for Toronto, 1 for Vancouver, 3 for Winnipeg, 15-ish for Washington, Anaheim, 5-8 is 13. 13 for Anaheim. 13 games is more important than 5 goals in the NHL as far as I'm concerned. 1 for Arizona, or no, probably 8 for Arizona. 1 for Boston. 6 for Buffalo. 5 for Columbus. 6 for Calgary. 14 for Chicago. So, I mean, I don't think there's much of a point to continue going through all of these. It just doesn't make any sense. One season showing the need for a goalie for 20 games on multiple occasions is that's enough of a sample size for me as far as I'm concerned. So I think it's obvious. Um, so let's say something like 20 games um, played by a goalie, and then quantifying that as the percentage value of the team's defensive contributions versus 5 goals of a team's offensive contributions. And I think very clearly the value is in the goalie. I think it's clear as day as far as I'm concerned. Um, we'll still have a look to see if there's any other data points to uh, consider, but I think it's already obvious. Um, we do need to consider salaries, so just don't forget about that. We have to go back and consider salaries. But I just want to see if there's any other things that I've gathered from previous streams that are relevant other than the salary aspect. So we don't really need that. Player expectations, we don't really need that. But I'll keep it just in case. And I think that is all of the. Yeah. So now we'll talk, I guess, about salary. So, what is the cost contrasting um, a 13th forward or a 7th defenseman and even at the most expensive, a backup goalie. We'll kind of see. So, worst case scenario, I would say what you could do is 3 1B goalies, uh, and almost certainly I would expect you'd be able to afford it. Um, but the target I would say is a starter. So you have a starter, uh, a backup, which would in theory be approximately a 1B, and then another 1B. I think you'd be able to accomplish that financially. So we'll just have a look here at the costs of some players and figure it out. So, um, where is it here? So again, remember some of these salary stats are not the best because we had limitations on what data we could um, gather in the filters that we had. Um, so for a starter quality goalie, the average salary was 5.4 million. The minimum was 1.85 million, and the max was 10.5. So again, just keep in mind the sample size here is kind of small, 17 goalies. Uh, but all things considered, I mean, you can get 4 goalies at a cost under $3 million. So again, these guys you would have to have them on your roster to be able to have them at that cost already. Because to trade for a goalie that's at a starter level at that cost is like, I mean, the cost in a trade would be crazy. So in reality, that wouldn't be realistic, but just to look at that as the potential And these are one-off seasons. So, like I said, goaltending performance fluctuates. And so, in theory, if you pick up a 1B goalie, and you sign him to a 3-year contract, one of those 3 years might be at starter quality performance uh, because of those fluctuations. So long as you target a goalie that is within range of decent capabilities, um, you could theoretically get very good quality starts, is what I would argue. So, anyway, so that just kind of shows you that you can get good quality starts at a low cost, possibly. So you've got, in this case, it's Jake Allen, which, I mean, if you just think about that right now, if you wanted to pick up Jake Allen from Montreal, it probably wouldn't be that costly. And in theory, you could maybe get really good starts out of him. He hasn't been that great as of lately, but anyways, just keep it in mind as a concept of a guy you could target inexpensively as maybe, again, in theory, a third stringer based on the concept we're talking about right now. So, John Gibson, it's an absolute no that could happen. Hellebuck, no. And Kemper, clearly no. So, and again, remember the time frame that we were looking at here was 20, I think it was 2016, 17, 17, 18, and 18, 19, if I'm not mistaken. So these are in the past, so now we know that they're good, but at the time we didn't really necessarily know. So anyways, just something to keep in mind as we're looking at these stats here. So now going to the second string goalies based on the tiers I established, and having a look at this the salaries here. So minimum salary you found was $650,000, super cheap. Average was still relatively cheap, 3.5 million, and max was 6 million. So really, there's probably a lot of gold that you can find in this 1B kind of range of goalies. So just to demonstrate, McElhinney, as far as I'm concerned, was an extremely good backup. And if we were to actually apply the theory that I'm saying right now, he would be an excellent, like during his playing days, because I think he's retired now. He would be an awesome guy to keep around as a third stringer. Of all the, if you were to implement this and choose probably the easiest person to potentially have on your roster using this strategy, because in all likelihood you could get McElhinney even if you had to overpay him, maybe at like, I don't know, he probably never made more than $1 million, I'm guessing, but he probably, I don't even think, made $1 million, but I'd have to look. But we're just talking concepts right now. So worst case scenario, you could maybe get a third stringer as McElhinney. Compare that to a 5-goal scorer forward. As we've already established, I think it's clear as day that the value could be extremely high for that third stringer. So that's just an example of worst case scenario, kind of what you would have as your third stringer. So Calvin Pickard, maybe you could have there, 850,000. Kudobin, when he was playing decently, would be a guy that you could have. Kincaid hasn't played well as of late. I think he's typically now playing in the AHL. Or was he one of the guys that got demoted even more? Anyways, there's a few that have gone even lower than a third stringer. But Grice would be an awesome guy to have around as a third stringer. Maybe not so much now because he's older, but a few years ago 1.5 million. So like let's say you have, well, two times the average goalie of this tier, let's say 3.5 times 2, 7 million, and then spend another million or so on a third stringer. That's 8 million on goaltending. That's probably better than a starter and a backup in terms of total contribution to winning for a team. So I really, really think that this strategy has huge value. So just another example of how it can be done. So Chad Johnson, when he was playing very well, would be excellent as a third stringer. Again, more towards the worst case scenario like a McElhaney. Think about Koskinen as a third stringer. I mean, it's not. He's good enough to be a third stringer. As a backup, no. As a starter, definitely not. But to have him as a third stringer on your team, if the top two just don't perform well enough or one of them gets injured, he's definitely good enough. Carter Hutton during his time, and this is where we're starting to get a bit expensive. So 2.75 million. So, and again, remember, there's limitations to this data. We've got 31 data points because it's of the filter problem and time frame limitations that we had for gathering of the data. So just keep that in mind. So yeah, and then moving down to the third stringers, it doesn't really work from the filters, so this isn't going to demonstrate it that well. But Aaron Dell, as an example, I don't know what he's getting paid now, but as your third stringer, let's just say 1.9 million, it's still very reasonable. So what we'll actually do now is let's just flip over to current salaries, scan through some goalies, and let's see what we could actually put together using this strategy that I'm talking about. So give me a couple moments to pull things up. Actually, I can show you this anyways. So we want active players. We want goaltenders. We want. Oh yeah, and there was one other thing that I was going to talk about. If anybody is actually signed in and can type in the chat to remind me to go back and talk about RFAs and stuff. So, because that's something that's still relevant here. Yeah, if nobody does it in the chat, I'll try to remember. But RFAs, I have to remember to go back and, well, actually, you know what? Let's just do a tab and put RFA. And then this way I can't forget. Okay, so we want goalies. We want this year. We don't need that. And let's have a look. So we've got cap hit. We don't want to... Do we want to organize by cap hit or do we want to organize by starts? Let's go by starts because I think we'll be able to find all the gold more easily by going through it this way. So again, I forget what the term is. The blue sky when it comes to brainstorming and you're thinking about things is a blue sky approach or something like that. Anyways, basically where you have a blank slate and you're building a roster, you have complete freedom to do whatever you want. So like, let's say, this is something I'm going to be doing in a later stream, but like building the perfect roster. But let's say you have your choice at any goalie, and we're applying this theory of using 3 goalies. Let's just say we're doing that. So we can't really. We still have to be, impose some limitations, because it's not reasonable to think that you could get Vasilevsky, Hellebuck, and whoever else as all your 3 goalies. It's just totally not realistic. So let's impose a limitation on, we can't have the top tier of goalies. So like a Hellebuck, Vasilevsky, Saros, we can't have any of those guys. Let's just say Shesterkin, you can't have him either. So let's just say we cut off all the top tier goalies and think about what we can put together outside of that and be realistic. So Carter Hart is maybe somebody you could trade for at a low cost right now, and I think he's better than he's been performing this year. He had an uptick in his performance, and I think it's from better coaching and structure to the team, and also bounce back. But anyway, so he's an idea of somebody in theory you could trade for at low cost. Sorokin is a guy you wouldn't be able to get. Oettinger, no. Gibson, I know that everybody talks about that you can trade for Gibson right now, but cost is probably too high. So Martin Jones maybe to think about as a third stringer in this concept here. So $2 million, that's within range of what you could conceivably do with your third stringer. Let's see what else we have here. Husso was a guy previously, like if you're going to do 1Bs all the way through, maybe. Vimelka, I don't think he's got enough of a track record that I'd be confident in him. Vanacek's a guy you could have there. Not a bad option. And I know, maybe that sounds like, oh, you're really underestimating him, but go back to his Washington stats. New Jersey's just doing really well right now. I wouldn't say it's necessarily an accurate representation of his quality of goaltending. So, but he's an idea. Fleury, if you could have Fleury as your third stringer, it'd be crazy good. But just a bit expensive. We're at these $3 million marks. So, Allmark, too expensive. Jake Allen's really a guy I like. So, he'd be, in my opinion, one of the better options as a backup. Not bad enough to be a third stringer, good for a backup in my opinion. And just remember, his stats look bad because he's with Montreal, and Montreal's a horrendous team. Otherwise, previously, he's one of the more consistent goalies in the past number of years. Skinner, it'd be nice to have an RFA guy, which is something I'll talk about later. Reimer, $2.25 million. He is one of the most consistent goalies through his career. He's an awesome backup, in my opinion. You could, if you go back to his stats, even put him as a 1A goalie. Not a starter, but a 1A. Talbot could be good. Forsberg, not enough of a track record for me to be confident. Samsonov, another guy, $1.8 million. He's a good third stringer And again, I mean, people are going to say that I'm like, oh, you're calling him a third stringer. Well, just remember, go back to what it was, Washington. Go back to his Washington days. They weren't the greatest of stats on a good team. So, um, who else do we have here? Mrazek's another guy I like, kind of in the third stringer backup kind of spot. Uh, who else? Ranta's a great value guy, 2 million. I mean, maybe a bit pricey for what you're getting. Maybe not. I don't know. It's hard to say. So let's just choose a few of those guys, just for argument's sake, to start with something here. So, like, let's say you have Jake Allen, 2.875 plus. Who's another guy here? Reimer, 2.25, and Samsonov, 1.8. $6.9 million approximately for three goalies that I would argue are either backups or very strong quality third stringers, so a 1B kind of goalie. So just think about that. So $6.9 million, and you've got, that's an extremely low cost to begin with. Just alone, that's an extremely low cost. You've got three goalies, so if one gets injured, you've got still two very, very good goalies. And even if one of those two goalies remain and gets injured, you still got a guy that's good enough to give you quality starts. And over the span of an 82 game season, you're probably going to get by. Realistically, you'd also want a fourth stringer that you could pull up from the AHL that's good enough. But just think of the confidence you would have in your goaltending circumstance if you had those three guys sitting there. Like, again, remember, these aren't the best goalies in the league. We're just talking about getting quality starts in contrast to what you're getting if you have like a Hellebuck and, well, previously for Winnipeg it was Comrie, or what's another good example? So it's not quite perfect. Just remember that Swayman is relatively new and young, but a guy of his inexperience, you could say, prior to now, with Ullmark. I mean, really, it's very risky to, if you lose Ullmark, have to rely on Swayman, and then your third stringer is, who knows with Boston, I don't know. That's so risky. And on top of it, you're paying $5 million for Ullmark, and Swayman, I think, is still on his entry level. So for nearly the same price, you have tons more risk. Why on earth are you doing that? How that's commonplace, the more that I think about it, it just doesn't make any sense to me. So that's just an example from the first page here. We'll go through the next page as well and just see a few more examples. Another great example, Craig Anderson to use as your third stringer, 1.5 million. Unreal the value you could get there. So let's chop off the 1.8 from here. Minus 0.3 could be $6.6 million, and you have Craig Anderson as one of your goalies. Like, just think. So that would have been Allen, Reimer, and Anderson. Like, that as a three three tandem group, unreal in my opinion. I think it would be fantastic. Um, what else do we have here? Grice, I mean, he's getting a bit old and his performance is slipping, but uh, he's a guy, 1.25 you could get right now. So instead of Craig Anderson, you could have him. And more of a worst case scenario. What else do we have here? You know what? I'm just going to filter out the RFA, so entry level contracts. So just give me a sec, because that'll help with filtering through here. Stalock I don't like. Elliott at 900,000. Like, I mean, the only reason he's getting paid that is because he's probably taking a pay cut to be with Tampa. So, but worst case scenario, I mean, 2 million for Elliott, something like that. Slot him into one of these spots. I mean, he's way too good to be a third stringer. So you could do Elliott, Reimer, and Anderson. Like, just think of that. That's just crazy. Who else? Riddick, 900,000. I mean, he's maybe not consistent enough to put into like that three goalie tandem. Anybody else here? He's paid too much. So, anyways, so those are just a few examples. Now, maybe it's not perfectly possible. And again, remember we're looking at we're looking at this season and it's half a season. So we're missing out on a lot of options here. Also, some of these RFA guys, so entry level players, you could probably get at a low cost. So, who do we have here? Kochetkov, maybe you could get inexpensively in a trade. I forget if Spencer Knight was re-upped for... Yeah, he was. Okay. So obviously not a good choice. Who else do we have here? Aaron Dell's not a bad option in a worst case scenario. Oh, Kincaid is with Boston, so he's their third stringer, which makes sense. So anyways, so maybe there's some limitations in terms of the scarcity of goaltending, but there's a lot of goalies that you know what, let's just pull it up for fun. The HL stats, goalie stats. Let's just have a look at some of the goalies in the AHL right now that could theoretically be playing up in the NHL. Dustin Wolf, I know, has been playing fantastic for Wranglers there. So, like I said, we're getting into worst case scenario kind of stuff here, but Deming as a third stringer is not unreasonable. Schneider, not unreasonable. But, I mean, this is where we're getting into riskier territory where this strategy doesn't make as much sense. But Askarov's been great in the minors. So, anyways, so just wanted to go over the AHL goalies to get to an even worse case scenario. So where you're going to a lower spot than like an Aaron Dell or whatever. So, anyways, so that kind of demonstrates the concept that I'm saying here, where really, I think it's clear as day that teams need to be considering carrying three active goalies, um, and the fact that it's not a strategy at this point. If a team was to execute on this strategy now before it would ever become popular, which I mean it theoretically could um, become popular at some point, so it would be wise, assuming that everything I've said is correct, to do this very quickly before other teams start doing it uh, to secure some of these goalies. So, like to trade for a Reimer as your third stringer, or something along those lines. Like now would be a good time to do it. So, for an example, for a team like the Rangers, let's say, because I believe their backup is Halak right now. You've got Shesterkin, Halak, and let's say you had like a Reimer sitting around as a backup, or well, third stringer. I mean, that would be really, really good for them. Should anything go bad between now and assuming they make the playoffs for however long their run is, to have that as your three levels of goaltending, I'd put Halak and Reimer kind of in the same quality level. But Shesterkin, Halak, and Reimer, oh my, like that would be crazy. Uh, so, anyways, it's just all I'm saying is if you're going to use this strategy, now is the time. It would be extremely smart to do it before anybody else does, um, so that you have some goalies locked up. Now, the concern is that you're locking up these goalies. You don't want to lock up these goalies for long term, maybe. It's difficult to say, and especially because of fluctuations in performance. So maybe the fact that you would be using this strategy could make it worthwhile for you to lock up goalies for longer term contracts than I would usually recommend. So because of fluctuations in goalie performance, uh, this is something we'll discuss later, like in future streams when I'm actually putting together the perfect roster. Um, but yeah, so just from what I've seen so far, really goalies you don't optimally, if you have the choice, you wouldn't really want to sign them for longer than something like 3 years. So, um, using this strategy, maybe you could lock up three goalies for 5 years and it not be risky because you have three goalies at, well, let's say one at 3 or 4 million, another one at 1 to 2 million, and another one at 1 to 2 million. So locking those up, even if they start to deteriorate, you still have two that are good, and it's all inexpensive anyways. So really, there's no risk. Like it's not a big deal. Even if you had to uh, dump the salary in the minors, it's still not a big deal in terms of the cap hit for managing that. So I mean, uh, anyway, so just another thing to consider about contract length, you could get away with more mistakes if you do this as well. So another benefit. I think that was all I was gonna touch on with respect to goalies of those types. So not talking about RFAs, and I'm just debating on if there's anything I'm missing before I move to that. Um, was there anything else? I don't think so. If I come up with anything else, then I'll bring it up as I talk about the rest here. So now we'll move on to discussing RFA goalies, so entry level goalies and things like that. So what you could do, so I just briefly touched on it a couple minutes ago, was talking about AHL goalies that you could, in theory, apply this strategy and it would still work. So like if you had, so a name I've seen often as performing well in the AHL right now is Dostal with, I think it's the Anaheim franchise. Give me a sec here. Yeah, and he's played really well in the minors. So if you had Dostal and then like whatever we had before, so Reimer and Allen or something like that, this plan is not. I don't think it's a good idea to carry three goalies and keep a young goalie up in the NHL. For the development, I think it would be a bad idea. They always speak of it. I'm not a coach or GM, so they would know better than I would how negative of an impact it would have. But having played goalie, just when you're not playing enough, it would wear on you. Now, this goes back to the concept. So yeah, if we're having three NHL goalies active on the roster, well, what's going to happen about lack of starts? So that's a concern. Is it a major concern? I would say no. The reason being is because let's say you're 1A goalie. So in the example I had, let's say it's Reimer, Allen, and see, it's tough to choose between some of these goalies. Reimer, Allen, and let's say Aaron Dell or something like that. So who's your starter out of Allen and Reimer? I'd probably say Reimer's more consistent, at least historically. So let's just say though, so you have, how often is Reimer going to be perfectly consistent? Not all the time. You bring in Allen, how consistent is he going to be all the time? Not perfectly consistent. So in reality, that third stringer is going to play games because in all likelihood in the span of a season, both Reimer and Allen would have simultaneously a bad stretch of performance. And this is where that third stringer would come in to play some games. To have all three not playing well at the same time seems extremely unlikely to me. So, yes, are they going to not play all the time? Of course, they're not going to play that often. So, but, or conceivably they could not play often, but in all likelihood they'll play. And oftentimes these backups are only playing something like 10 games anyways. So what's the difference between a backup goalie playing 10 games when they have a starter versus a third string goalie playing 10 games when there's three goalies? There's no difference as far as I'm concerned. You're sitting out the same amount of time, you're getting the same amount of practice time. It doesn't matter. That's why the argument against a goalie sitting out would only be true if the two goalies ahead of them are playing lights out, and in which case that's not a problem because you got two goalies playing lights out. So who cares? If the guy gets rusty, I mean, you just hope that you don't have something stupid happen where both your guys get injured and you have to rely on them. But I mean, if you have a quality third stringer, that's not really a major concern, even if they've been sitting out in their cold. So, anyways, the three goalie concept doesn't make sense when you have a a goalie on an level contract, which is what I was getting at. So what you would want, if that, so like let's say your franchise, you've done good enough in drafting and developing goalies, and you've got a really good young player sitting around, like an Askarov or something like that. Um, that's where this three goalie concept still applies, but you're just slightly adjusting it. And what I mean by that is rather than three goalies on the active roster, what you're actually going to do is take advantage of the RFA status and the two-way status as well, whereby that third stringer is playing all your starts in the AHL as much as you possibly can play the goalie. And you have a problem with performance in any of these goalies, instantaneously you pull them up and for any backup games you need to have. So like let's say you got Reimer, Allen, and an Askarov as your third stringer. So Askarov's playing all the time in the AHL. Let's say Allen's not playing well, Reimer's not playing well. You pull up Askarov. You don't worry about that 13th forward, 7th defenseman. You just don't care about what happens with him going down into the minors or whatever. Preferably, you'd want an RFA guy that you could move up and down and not worry about losing him. But yeah, you even if you lose a guy, I mean, big deal. I think the goaltending, prioritizing the goaltending performance is more important. So basically, you have your two guys, Allen and Reimer, not playing well. You move up the Askarov guy, put him in starts, have those other two guys sit out until they shore up their game. If everything goes well and you start moving, let's say, Reimer back into some games, he starts playing well, you can throw Askarov back down to the AHL and then try to work between Allen and Reimer. So that's kind of the whole option you have if you have a quality prospect goalie. So the concept still applies, but you're kind of rotating in a different way where that prospect is still getting play in the AHL. So that's another application of the concept that I think makes a lot of sense, where you can take advantage of the RFA status and you don't damage the development of a prospect goalie. So in reality, if you use this concept and you do develop a good goalie, you never want them to be up in the NHL until they're getting a lot of starts. So basically, if you're running with two 1B, 1A goalies, whatever you want to call them, like let's, again, using the example with Allen and Reimer, you only want that AHL prospect guy to go up when one of those goalies either leaves your franchise, or sorry, when one of those guys leaves your franchise or you trade him, assuming that AHL guy is good enough to fill that spot. So once the development's right there and they're good enough to share the net with another 1B goalie or whatever you want to call them, that's the only time you pull them up. Otherwise, they're not good enough to pull up anyways, so to keep them as your third stringer is perfectly fine. So it all makes sense, no matter how you evaluate it, plan it, structure it, whatever. It all makes sense. So anyways, that's I think everything I really want to say about the subject. I think it's obvious that GMs should be doing this. I was going to say should be considering this, but it's not even really that. I think franchises need to be doing this. Like, it does not make sense not to do this. The only way that it doesn't make sense is if everybody starts to do this, and then it's not possible. So if everybody starts to do this, and then you run out of the ability to have three 1B goalies, um, then this strategy no longer works. But at this moment in time, uh, this strategy should be implemented by somebody, and should be implemented by multiple teams. And then once it becomes applied so often that it's no longer possible, so the wells run dry of those third string goalies that are worthy of being up in the NHL. Um, that's where this strategy no longer applies, and where um, you need to start developing a new strategy. Um, so in any case, at this point in time, as I'm making this stream, I think it's blatantly obvious that franchises need to be doing this immediately in order to increase their performance. That's my opinion. So I think that summarizes everything. I'm interested. I wish I had a direct communication line with GMs to communicate this concept and argue my case. If you come across this, please, if you have any connection and can pass it on, I mean, it would be great if you could get it to somebody so that it can be used. It would be really nice. And yeah, because then hopefully it could be implemented. So anyways, if you like this stream, hit the like button, share with your friends, subscribe, turn on notifications. Otherwise, yeah, the channel homepage has upcoming streams. It should be 2 p.m. Eastern daily, unless things change, like today was a great example. And yeah, if you have any comments, leave them in the comments, suggestions likewise. And I'm going to be setting up the topics for the rest of the week in a couple or throughout the day at some point. And tomorrow we'll be moving on to another subject again of the whole series, working more on and getting towards the end of the series here, where we're able to implement the strategy. So anyways, so that's everything. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you guys tomorrow.